Hi everyone, this is Wei. My topic is environmental injustice in Des Moines elementary schools. Here's the abstract. So my goal is to study the relationship between racial, social-economic status and school performance, to study the issue of educational equity, and to explore the relationship between environmental justice indicators, school performance, to address the environmental justice issue among the elementary school in Des Moines. The methodology is quantitative methods. I selected the 8 schools along the Transit line, use quantitative approach to analyze the relationship between racial SES, school performance, and environmental justice indicators. The results show that race and SES profoundly affect the school performance in Iowa. Minority, ethnic, and low SES children tend to study in the low-performance schools. The eight elementary schools students have different levels of risks of exposure to their environmental hazard. But the environmental exposure do not have a specific correlation with the race and SES in this study. Those results show some levels of educational and environmental justice in Des Moines. Still more research needs to be done to identify the injustice in different scales and dimensions to help in making further conclusions. I have 2 research questions. 1. Do racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic status related to the school performance? 2. Do racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic status affect the risks of students' exposure to the noise and air pollution from road and aviation sources at schools? The methodology of this research includes 1. Select the Transit line and schools. 2. Use quantitative methods to study the relationships among ethnic and socioeconomic status, school performance, and environmental justice indicators. I will detailedly talk about those later. In order to identify the relationship among the school children, traffic-related pollution, and the environmental exposure risk of the children, I select the 8 schools along the Transit line, which extends across the city of Des Moines in area with multiple land use schools and boundaries from urban to rural. This slide shows the schools in Transit line and the land use in this area. Now I'm going to talk about the data analysis and results. The data analysis includes 2 parts, the school performance and demographics analysis, and the environmental justice indicators analysis. In order to answer my research question, so firstly, I studied the overall schools in Iowa. Here's the slide shows the basic situation of the Iowa. And this slide shows the overview of the top 10 schools in Iowa. In order to easily understand the basic situation of the top 10 schools, I made a table. From the table, we can clearly see the characters of those 10 schools. Obviously, those schools have higher percentage of white students and low percentage of low SES students. And this slide shows the overview of the 8 schools in the Transit line. And obviously, those 8 schools are relatively low percentage of white students and higher percentage of low SES students. And so the school performance are much lower than the top 10 schools. And I color-coding those different categories to visually show the differences and relationships among those elements. And this slide shows the low-income population and school location, minority population and school locations. So, coding all of those city maps, we can easily understand those eight schools are located in different areas. Those schools are relatively diverse in terms of higher percentage of minorities and low SES students. And four of the schools are in the communities that have relatively higher percentage of low income and minority populations, and their school performance are relatively low. After the basic analysis, I compared the A school with the top 10 schools at the state level. The top 10 schools have a higher ratio of their white students and lower ratio of SES students. They have higher performance scores. Then I compared the 8 schools. The results shows the schools have located in the higher percentage of low-income population and minority population areas have a relatively low performance score, and the white ratios almost have a positive correlations with the SES. In terms of higher percentage of white students, the lower percentage of SES students. And the highest three performance scores of the 8 schools have a higher ratio of white and lower ratios of low SES students among the 8 schools. The second part of their analysis is environmental justice indicators. I analyzed the traffic-related noise pollution and air pollution. Those two slides show the map of noise pollution and air pollution. So different location will be differently impacted by the pollutions, and I roughly categorize the different impacts into different level. So I made a table for this. Then again, I did some comparisons among those different characters. Then I got some results. The white ratio almost have a positive correlation with the low SES in terms of higher percentage of white students, the lower percentage of low SES students. The 8 schools are under various degrees of impacts of the traffic-related pollutions, but the noise and air pollution impacts do not have a certain correlations with the school performance, which means they don't have the correlations with the students' race and SES as well. All in all, the results shows that first, the minority, ethnic, and low SES have negative correlations with school performance in Iowa. A higher percentage of minority, ethnic, and low SES students in the school, the lower school performance they will have. Second, the 8 schools have different levels of risks for exposure to the hazard environments. The Walnut Street School have the highest risk. The Morris Elementary School have the second highest risk because those schools are close to the pollution sources. Third, the exposure risk of pollution do not affect the school performance with those 8 schools, which means the exposure has no certain correlations with the arsenic and SES ratios. And here's my discussion part. I think the school will need to do more to provide more access to high quality green space and high quality building conditions to protect the students from environmental impacts. Besides, more work needs to be done to identify more social and environmental injustice from school and communities and provide fair educational opportunities and better environmental conditions to all students. There are also limitations of this research, like there's no enough samples of schools to represent the whole area, and the lack of field observation will make this research lose some dimensions to address the issues. So here is my final conclusion. This study offers a brief view of Des Moines elementary schools and shows a certain level of injustice in those schools. The 8 elementary school students have different levels of risks of exposure to the hazard environment. The arsenic and SES ratio highly affect the school performance in Iowa, but the environmental exposure do not have certain correlation with the race and SES. The study shows some levels of educational and environmental injustice in Des Moines, but more research needs to be done to identify the inequity in different scales and dimensions. And here's my references. Thank you for listening and have a good night.